kalian lagi dengerin Kepo tapi Peduli alias KTP The Podcast, di mana gue, Dina, dan Josephine bakal kepoin cewek-cewek asli Indonesia who is doing hot girl shit. Kali ini kita ditemenin sama our dear friend Stephanie Tangkilisan. Kita udah ngebet banget pengen kepoin cewek lulusan Columbia Journalism School ini. Stephanie is a journalist, film producer, and also all-around overachiever. Dia tuh otak dibalik pinterpolitik.com, which is a website yang menganalisa berita-berita terkini dari Indonesia. Dan gak cuman itu guys, dia juga udah mensutradarai film dokumenter yang berjudul Trouble Finds You. Selain mendapat tunjangan sebesar 50.000 USD, filmnya tuh sukses banget sampai udah diputer di 7 film festivals di Amerika Serikat. Sekarang, Stephanie terus membangun karirnya di perfilman sebagai produser dokumenter di Vice US. Di episode ini, kita kepoin dia tentang suka dukanya tinggal di Amerika, dan tentu aja kita ngobrol-ngobrol tentang karirnya. Welcome, Stephanie! Gimana rasanya jadi orang Indonesia yang tinggal dan kerja di Amerika udah sekian lama?
I think I'm very lucky in the sense that I've received a good education, that I don't have a strong accent. I sound pretty passably American most of the time, except when I'm like stumble upon a very complicated word. Like there's certain words I just can't pronounce for some reason.
Same girl.
I used to say spatula for the longest time. It was only like last year that someone corrected me.
Oh no.
It's so embarrassing.
But like, I don't know if you guys feel this way, but I think having an American enough accent gives you a lot of social capital and work capital, honestly. Working in the US, because I know of other doc filmmakers from J school who has a rougher accent. They struggled a lot more working on stories or like getting a job, right? Because a lot of things that we have to do is related to communicating with people.
Mm-hmm. And ada nggak sih yang lu harus korbanin untuk tinggal di Amerika?
Oh, yeah.
And like also what you gained dari tinggal di Amerika?
I was thinking this recently. I don't know if you guys are as old as me now. A lot of my friends are getting married, and some of them already have children. So I've missed a lot of weddings that I regret. Because of COVID and work and my visa situation, it was really risky for me to go home. Like my best friend got married recently, so I missed her wedding. And it's still really sad to me. And for other friends, I don't know their kid. They're continuing to live on their lives without me. I've only really felt this year. As we get older, it's going to feel like your lives are more and more separating. This is a pattern that will continue in our lives. You're going to miss things.
Let me know if this is like too much to ask, but was it hard for you to decide to live in the US, and what helped you in deciding that?
So I had a quarter life crisis. After undergrad, I went back to Indo. I was there for like 3-4 years. And I worked at my family business, and I was very unhappy. I did not feel like I was fulfilling my potential, if that makes sense. I just felt very stuck. I can see what the outline of my life would be like until I die. At a quarter life crisis, I was like, this is not what I want for my life. And I decided to apply to journalism school, and Columbia was the only place I applied, and I got in, and I just went for it. And I've been like really generally happy since. Like it's a lot of struggle sometimes. I'm still not sure if I'm going to be here for the rest of my life. But I think in America, for me and in my field, I've learned a lot from the people I work with. I'm not saying that you can't do this in Indo. You can find great people. It's just that like I feel like my growth here has accelerated because of like the standards that they have here for me. And I really want to learn how to be like a world-class storyteller. And like that's a lot more people are working at a like higher level here than Indo.
Dan walaupun lo udah lama di sini, lo ada gak harapan-harapan that you would like to see more di dunia journalism di Indonesia?
There's a lot of great journalists in Indonesia, honestly. And there's a lot of great filmmakers in Indonesia. It's just that I don't know if there's a lot of combination of the two, right? Like I don't know if there's a lot of investigative filmmaking docs in Indonesia, or if there is, I haven't seen it. There's a thriving documentary scene in Indo. And there's a lot of people who are happy to mentor too. Like it's a small community. Well, all the Indo filmmakers are super friendly too, like doc filmmakers. I did a story that happened in Jawa like a few years ago. I did that story, and then I had a like local producer who can speak Sunda, and that was like I could not have done it without
Yeah.
him.
Because language is like a big thing, right? Like what you mentioned before, it's like the way we communicate to other people. Dan lu juga mungkin kalau keluar negeri, kalau lu mau jurnalis juga tentu lu harus bisa ngomong bahasanya gitu untuk connect sama orangnya gitu ya.
Yeah, language is a big thing, and then like it's not just what you say, kayak how you say it tuh penting banget. People can be really sensitive, of course, as they should be when they're talking about like a very personal, private thing. Like a lot of what we do is like, hey, can you relive your like most traumatic moments for me? It's just like sometimes I really do think what we do is like very emotionally vulture like. I do sometimes feel guilty about what I do. It's kind of bizarre. But yeah, language is super important. Misalnya like bahasa Sunda, like gue nggak bisa ngomong kan, that creates a barrier, right? Language creates a barrier. Makanya kadang-kadang gue berada bingung sih sama orang asing yang gampang banget bikin film dokumenter di Indonesia. Screening this film called Ghost Ships. It's like a documentary about enslaved fishermen in Indonesian waters by various fishing companies. And then the filmmaker pasti tanya kayak, what's your biggest struggle getting like doing this film? And then they're like, well, you know, like not speaking the language, I don't know when they're speaking Thai or Indonesian. I'm like, did you ever think that you were the right person to like tell the story? Like this two white director and producer. And the messed up thing too is like, this is the story of enslaved or recently enslaved people, right? And then like they're just shoving cameras in these people's faces who are just freed. What kind of consent is there when you are a white person in Indonesia in a vulnerable moment with a camera crew? There's a racial power dynamics here that cannot be ignored, and I think that is really messed up.
Ngomong-ngomong tentang interviewing your subjects, do you have any advice to how, or like maybe good practice to not exploit your subjects?
I think it's like drop-in journalism is what makes people most feel exploited. Kayak, you talk to them, you film, and you come back and you never hear from them again. I don't think I've 100% been the best at it. When I'm working on, in the past year, I've worked probably on like 10 plus stories, and like each story has like 4 or 5 different people or even more, so that's 50 plus people or more that I have to keep in touch with if I was on top of it. It's just impossible, right? So I think like recognizing that there obviously not everybody cares about being kept in touch. Like I don't think a superstar professor at MIT that I interviewed a few weeks ago cares that I'm not in touch with them anymore. Like but sometimes it's like about following your gut, especially when it's someone who's in vulnerable situation. I always tell people like, tell me what you're not comfortable with discussing, and like if you want to take a pause at any moment, just let me know. We can take a pause, we can break, and then you express how much gratitude that you have on them, and like work within what boundaries they feel comfortable in, as opposed to like trying to force people to do things that they're not comfortable doing. I think what's really important too is trying to understand the story as deeply as possible, and then how you edit and work on the story in a way that empowers people instead of poverty porn, essentially.
Sesuatu yang gue kepikiran kalau misalnya ngomongin journalism itu kan censorship ya. Nah, gak cuma di Indo, di Amerika juga tentu mungkin ada hal-hal yang disensor dan mungkin levelnya beda gitu di Indo dan di Amerika. Kalau misalnya menurut lu journalism butuh batasan nggak?
Almost no. I don't believe in censorship. By censorship, I mean like government or private interference on the press, right? I'm not talking about banning certain people on social media. That's two very different things, especially on a private platform, right? It's like, what do governments have to hide, right? And often like national security, kayak especially di Indo tuh gampang banget dibilang kayak ini membahayakan national security, nama baik presiden or whatever. It's like those kinds of things. It's not really risking anything directly, right? The only boundaries that I think is important is if it risks, like for example, ongoing operations. I have friends and like mentors who've worked in wartime, right? So like when you're talking about news, you can't disclose like what's gonna happen like to terrorists, that kind of thing. I think that's important. I think journalists generally do a good job self-censoring too. Like we're pretty careful about like disclosing facts that could endanger our sources, for example. There are cases where I didn't air certain parts of what my film or what our film is about because it could jeopardize our subject's ongoing court case or sentencing. Like that's something we do.
Ada nggak sih perbedaan terbesar antara journalism di Indonesia versus di Amerika? Mungkin kayak contohnya censorship gitu.
Yeah, 100% censorship. For me, I find it difficult to work in Indonesia and live in Indonesia. I think there's so many brave filmmakers and journalists who are doing dangerous things, and I am generally drawn to stories about like genocide and like violence and all of this like kind of bigger topics that are still very much a red flag in Indonesia. I think if I worked in Indonesia, I probably would want to work on those stories, but I would also be worried about working on the stories. It's just, difficult.
To follow up what you mentioned just now, apa sih bedanya kayak censoring dari government versus kayak censoring the public in private platforms?
Yeah, it's kind of weird, right? Because private platforms now have almost bigger influence than press, honestly. And that's one thing I feel really confused about myself. Trump being banned from Twitter and Facebook for the Capitol riots, like that was very much justified, and they're inciting violence, right? Okay, particular harmful speech I think should be regulated, but doesn't mean that people can be just outright banned. Like when I was working on the QAnon story, so many of the people we talked to, they lost their platforms. It was really hard personally for me to like find archival and contact a lot of people as a journalist. Like actually censorship by private companies makes our job really hard actually. But to ban people outright from saying anything from platforms makes me really uneasy.
Karena lo mention tadi contohnya censorship dan segala macam. Gimana caranya kita sebagai konsumer bisa mensupport good journalism di Indonesia?
It's really hard actually. Obviously subscribe to majalah Tempo and Kompas. But it's also more than that. I think butuh support network gitu loh. Directly contributing to the people whose work you like is really important, especially for independent journalists and filmmakers. Misalnya kalau ada, a journalist atau a filmmaker you like, look out if they're doing Kickstarter campaigns or any kind of fundraising campaigns. If you don't have the funds, like share their work.
Nice. Ngomong-ngomong tentang supporting good journalism, obviously you built pinterpolitik.com. Nah, untuk jadi pinter dalam politik tuh kan obviously penting supaya kita bisa paham tentang hak kita dan bisa bersuara. Tapi banyak orang yang kesulitan untuk terjun ke dunia politik atau even keeping up with it. Personally, gue juga sendiri suka pusing karena gue nggak ngerasa I know everything, like the context to the stories that are being told in these news. Ada nggak sih saran-saran untuk orang-orang yang pengen lebih pinter dalam politik?
Kalau di Indonesia sih menurut gue the best practice itu kayak subscribe ke majalah Tempo sih, terus baca terus. Kalau pas gue di Indonesia, that's like the most simple way. I also am really lucky to have a dad who would explain things to me. Tirto.id is also really good, besides Pinterpolitik obviously. There's some great YouTube channels like Frame and Sentences that oftentimes talks about like different important issues. Just finding a medium that works for you and sticking with it. Like I think it's consistency, like being okay with like kadang-kadang kayak gue nggak tahu semuanya. Just keep pushing through that feeling of nggak tahu.
Kalau sekarang kan banyak nih news yang nggak selalu akurat dan maybe nggak di fact check juga kan. Gimana kita bisa lebih tahu lah journalism yang baik tuh gimana?
First thing that's important is looking at who they're citing as sources. Like itu faktanya dari mana, dari siapa yang bilang itu. Terus berapa source yang do they have? The more sources, the better. And then oftentimes kayak you can see like when they quote an expert, kadang-kadang iseng aja Google who's the expert that they're quoting gitu. Banyak kan sekarang anti-vaccine hoaxes gitu kan. Terus kayak you lihat that kind of news, and then if you actually look at the names of like the doctor they're quoting, you'll like find out sebetulnya mereka kayak dokter gadungan, like they're not real doctors.
Apalagi zaman sekarang gitu ya, semuanya tuh gampang banget diakses dan lu juga di mana aja tuh bisa dapet news dari WhatsApp lah, dari social media. So I feel like it's really easy for us to be fooled by these.
Yeah, and it's really difficult, and like they play into your own implicit biases a lot. You know, you tend to have friends who are in similar social circles, or you would have people who are in opposite social circles, and it's a lot easier to decipher if it's from your opposing view. So like I kind of make it a habit to read from a variety of news sources. For example, I still do believe there are certain outlets that I'm more inclined to believe than others, like, you know, New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal. In the US, kalau di Indonesia ya Kompas, Tempo. Tapi beyond that, kind of thinking also the bigger picture, like what's the motivation of this piece and what's the goal of this piece.
Another thing that we want to talk about is the art of storytelling. Setahu gue sebagai jurnalis dan produser sama-sama harus cari cerita yang bagus. Gimana cara lo sendiri untuk nyari atau milih cerita untuk diliput?
Beda-beda banget sih tergantung story-nya. Probably my boss think I'm very new generation in terms of like journalists, like very millennial. I find so much of my sources on social media, like Instagram. Instagram is amazing for journalism, honestly. Like it's super random, right? Like,
so you actually get paid to be on Instagram?
Oh, like 100%. I get paid to be on like Instagram. I get paid to like watch TikToks. We did an episode on TikTok influencers, so like I was on TikTok, try to talk to influencers, Gen Z. I felt very old, by the way. Like,
they're fascinating, aren't they?
They're really fascinating.
I feel really old.
It's like a whole different world.
I know.
And I think even just seeing it from not being a journalist too, I'm like, is this how the boomers felt about us?
100%. But I don't know. It's bizarre. But in terms of like, I find a lot of people's sources. I found sources on court documents. I found sources through contacts, right? Like that's also another thing I think I wanted to mention, but I forgot. Some journalists specialize very much in certain beats, like what you call beats or specializations. Like I have a friend who focuses on Supreme Court cases. Like another friend focuses on financial, like a particular kind of financial reporting or education reporting. That's especially more common if you are a print journalist. I think partially because your turnaround time is much faster. But if you're like making short videos or documentaries, oftentimes like your subjects can vary very widely. Our skill is more in like making the story and producing the story as opposed to like the subject of the story. In terms of like personally my beats, consistent I guess with my philosophy in journalism is like this idea of holding truth to power. I really like criminal justice stories, mostly because I'm very comfortable finding stories in court documents. Trouble Finds You started from a court document. And a selfish reason for that is that I really find the criminal justice system in America really messed up. I don't know, it's like kind of an easy target. I don't know. In a court document, you already know facts. There's already inherently in a court case a fight, right? Like a struggle. So that creates like this nice arc of a story. Like there's already stakes built in. Also, it like gives you definite characters and sources that you can find.
Yeah. How does that compare kayak criminal justice systemnya di Indo? Do you ever dabble in that?
This is what I always tell my sources, especially in the US, right? I think the criminal justice system, and this is I think like a good starting point when I talk to my sources, is like I'm from Indonesia. Like nobody in Indonesia really thinks our criminal justice system is just. Like some people in America think the criminal justice system is just. So like we're not under any delusion in Indonesia kayak money talks in Indonesia kan. Kayak kita tahu.
Setuju. Siapa yang lebih kaya?
Iya, siapa yang lebih kaya. Jadi kayak nggak ada yang shock gitu kalau ada yang injustice ya. Yeah, there will be protest like 100%. Tapi nobody believes that the truth will be unveiled in Indonesia. But I think it's really interesting too that the fact that we don't have delusions, I think puts us all in the same level playing field in like thinking about it, right? Where in the US, when you talk about criminal justice stories, there's a lot more gray area. There's a lot more things to unpack. To me, the more interesting cases are more gray area stories. Like, I'm not really interested in people who are like innocent but actually are not guilty. You know, everybody can empathize with anyone who's like wrongfully convicted, but to me what's interesting is like the person who did the crime but are disproportionately punished for the crime. That's, I think, like where I find things very interesting, because I think it allows us to expand this idea of who deserves our empathy.
Well, something that I was wondering, apakah upbringing lo sebagai seseorang yang lahir di Indonesia and grew up in Indonesia berdampak di sudut pandang lo ketika mengcapture sebuah cerita?
100%. I think what's funny, because of my accent and the way I speak English, a lot of times kayak orang Amerika kayak nggak sadar gue fresh off the boat gitu, tau nggak? Fresh off the plane. But my outsider point of view towards American story, I really like. It's something I want to keep, like the way I view the criminal justice system as a Indonesian impacts the way I do things. And then when we're working on stories around other developing countries, I'm like, gut check, like, you know, we're gonna film in a difficult part of Mexico City, like we need to hire proper security measures and like all this different stuff. And then I think maybe the biggest thing is like, sebagai orang Indonesia kan kita kayak lebih social, you know, like lebih friendly and personal, lebih ramah gitu ya. So in the way I approach people and do things, I genuinely mau friendly sama orang lain, and that not every producer or journalist is. I'm very much comfortable like telling them like I'm from Indonesia, like, you know, I may not know everything about this particular issue, but I want to get to know you. I think that's really helpful. And then I think sebagai orang Indonesia, like biasanya gue kayak orang yang lebih kalem in like situations kalau in the crew, kayak ya panik kayak nggak you know, like let's just go with the flow, like cincai lah, you know, like
Cincai. Just to like wrap up all our conversation, buat orang-orang yang mungkin anak-anak muda especially ya, yang mungkin masih kayak mikir-mikir gitu to actually care about politics or to at least keep up with the important parts of politics. Kalau misalnya lu nge-pitch kenapa hal ini penting, what would you say? Like, why is it important for us to actually care about what's going on in politics?
Because politics is what influences how you live and how everybody lives, right? Like, misalnya, you don't care about politics. Sometimes it's like because you have enough privilege to not care, you know? It's like your life isn't impacted by specific policies, kayak BPJS and then minimum wage. Those are political issues that impact people directly. Politics is about human life and the quality of people's lives. And if you care about other people, you should follow up with politics in a way, right? Because it's not like this abstract concept. You may not understand theoretical physics, but it's not really going to impact your life or other people's lives directly. Politics is that few thing that does matter directly to people's lives. And even if you can't change things, like I think being informed is like a way to show that you care about different people. Again, like being aware of that makes you more aware of like how you should be in your everyday life. Mm-hmm. I had this discussion with a good friend of mine who is a politician who decided to be in politics, and I decided to be outside of politics. And he heavily criticized me. He kept trying to like make me run for something too, kayak join political party and like change things from the inside. And I 100% see his point. If you can and you have the temperament to run and work in politics, I think you should go for it. I just don't think I have the temperament.
Yeah.
I interviewed like somebody and I was like, how do you keep your principles? Like, you know, how hard is it? And they're like, it's really hard. Like, you know, you have to compromise, and real politicians have to compromise, and you can't be as idealistic.
Mm-hmm.
I really admire like politicians who are trying to make change, because like they have to compromise a lot more.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to be honest with yourself about how you want to live your life.
Mhm.
And I was talking to my friend the other day, and he was like, you know, like some of our friends think that it's cool that you just like abandon everything and like become a filmmaker now. And I'm like, it's not really. Like, one, I will never be as financially comfortable as some of my friends, like 100%. Two, like, I don't think that I'm like this crusader of justice. I don't believe in that idea of like self-inflated ego. I do this because I believe in it, and it's something that I can sleep at night under capitalism doing with a clear conscience. And I honestly really enjoy the art of storytelling. Most of the time it doesn't feel like an art. Most of the time it feels like you're just trying to make something work.
That's an art.
And it's
That's
like
an art.
very not glamorous. Like, you know, it's very much like me and Google Docs the whole day, moving like lines around.
I mean, figuring out the story, it's an art in itself, because
And you don't know if it works. Like, you just sometimes try things and hope it works better.
100%.
And then people will tell you, are like, this doesn't work. What are you saying? This doesn't make any sense. There's just like some scenes that you put through.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing is like, I really enjoy in my line of work is I get to meet people
Mm-hmm.
and learn about a lot of different things. I get to drop into people's lives. Like, I've been in some really important days on a lot of different people's lives, right? And it's a privilege to be able to do that. My life is richer for it, and I experience a lot of things in my life, which is why I feel like it's a cool job if you want to try do it. But I don't think it's grand.
Yeah.
I think you have to have some principles doing it, and I think you have to mean well and do your best. But I don't believe in this being like necessarily a noble career in the way like saving people's lives directly is, or compromising in politics and making good policy is. At the end of the day, you make this good story, maybe it'll help people's lives in some way. Sometimes it just doesn't, and you just made this thing, and that's fine, you know, like that's life, and that's the work that you do.
Right. Well, thank you so much for coming into our podcast and being one of our amazing guests. Kalau kalian sebagai pendengar pengen tahu lebih banyak lagi tentang Stephanie and what she's up to, kalian bisa cek websitenya stephanietangkilisan.com dan Instagramnya Steph Tangka.
It's like the shortened kayak Steph Tangkilisan but short.
Ya, Steph Tank.
That's where it's
tapi
from, like
nggak pakai ilisan. Terus untuk yang mau belajar lebih tentang politik juga bisa boleh cek di pinterpolitik.com. Sumpah, gue paling seneng kalau lagi dapet DM atau komen tentang kabar-kabar dari kalian yang udah pada dengerin podcastnya. So keep it up. I love hearing from you guys. Feedback positif atau negatifnya pun gue welcome kok. Dan kalau kalian pada enjoy episode yang short and sweet ini, please show some love di Instagram ataupun TikTok guys. Kita udah di TikTok loh. @KTP_the_podcast as usual. Oh iya, di episode berikutnya Josephine bakal kepoin gue abis-abisan with her burning questions about my love life. Jadi kalau kalian ada yang pada kepo tentang personal life gue, silahkan aja drop the questions on Instagram because that's where I check it the most. And ntar gue bisa sekalian jawabin pertanyaan-pertanyaan kalian. Alright, keep in touch.